A receptionist found a broken millionaire sitting alone at night and healed his broken heart. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. Some nights change everything, and Delilah Moore should have seen it coming. The grand lobby of the Ocean View Grand Hotel had settled into its familiar midnight stillness. Crystal chandeliers cast gentle shadows across marble floors that reflected the last whispers of San Diego's evening fog rolling in from the harbor. Delilah adjusted her name tag for the 100th time that shift, her fingers unconsciously smoothing the burgundy fabric of her uniform as she reviewed the final checkout procedures. 2 years, 730 nights of this same routine, and she had learned to read the hotel's moods like a favorite book. The way the elevator hummed differently when it was truly empty, how the ocean breeze through the revolving doors carried different scents depending on the tide, the subtle creak of leather chairs in the lounge when the last businessman finally called it a night. But tonight felt different. Delilah's grandmother always said she had a gift for sensing when the air was about to shift. "That child can feel a storm 3 counties away," Grandma Rosie would tell anyone who'd listen, pride warming her voice. Tonight, that familiar tingling crawled up Delilah's spine as she filed the last of the evening's paperwork. The clock above the concierge desk read 12:47 a.m. when she first noticed him. A man sat motionless in one of the plush armchairs near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette barely visible against the twinkling lights of the city below. Strange. The security rounds should have cleared the public areas 20 minutes ago. Delilah squinted through the dim, ambient lighting, her heartbeat quickening slightly. His expensive suit was wrinkled beyond repair, the jacket hanging loose on his broad shoulders, like he'd been wearing it for days. Dark hair fell across his forehead in disheveled waves, and his hands were shaking so subtly that most people would have missed it. But Delilah had spent years perfecting the art of noticing what others overlooked. She approached slowly, her soft-soled shoes silent against the marble. Something about his posture, the way his head tilted just so, the careful positioning of his shoulders, told her this wasn't about hotel policy or security protocols. This was about something much more fragile. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice emerged softer than usual, instinctively gentle. "The lobby officially closes at midnight, but are you all right?" He didn't move. For a moment, Delilah wondered if he'd even heard her. Then slowly he lifted his head. The face that turned toward her made her breath catch. She knew him. Not personally, but she'd seen those sharp cheekbones and steel-gray eyes in the business section of the San Diego Tribune. Liam Hartwell, the engineering prodigy who'd revolutionized yacht design before disappearing from public view 6 months ago. But the man staring at her now looked nothing like the confident entrepreneur from those newspaper photos. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, carrying a weight that seemed to pull at the very air around him. "You ever feel like your life just stopped?" he whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Like the whole world kept spinning, but you got left behind in the dark?" The question hit Delilah like a physical force. She'd felt exactly that way 3 years ago, when her mother's medical bills forced her to drop out of nursing school, when dreams had to be folded away like out-of-season clothes, tucked into corners where they couldn't hurt so much. Instead of answering immediately, she pulled the guest chair closer and sat down, maintaining careful distance while closing the space between them emotionally. "I think," she said slowly, "that sometimes we don't get left behind. Sometimes we just need to stop moving long enough to figure out which direction we actually want to go." For the first time since she'd approached, Liam's shoulders seemed to relax a fraction. He studied her face as if searching for something, sincerity perhaps, or just basic human kindness. "I should probably go," he said, but made no move to stand. "Should probably and want to are 2 different things," Delilah replied gently. "The lobby might be closed, but I could make some tea. Earl Grey calms the mind, my grandmother always says." The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sound of waves against the harbor walls. Liam's hands had stopped shaking. "I haven't had tea in—" He paused, confusion flickering across his features. "I can't remember the last time I had tea." "Then it's definitely time," Delilah said, rising gracefully. "I'll be right back." As she walked toward the employee break room, she could feel his eyes following her. Something in her chest tightened, with an emotion she couldn't quite name. This wasn't just about hospitality or professional courtesy. This felt like the beginning of something that would change everything. And as Delilah reached for the tea canister, her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "Some people come into our lives like storms, child. Others come like gentle rain, but the ones who matter most, they come like morning sun after the longest night. She turned back toward the lobby, 2 steaming mugs in her hands, and found Liam watching her return with something that might have been hope flickering in those grey eyes. What she didn't know was that this simple act of kindness would unravel every wall they'd both built around their hearts. What would you do if you found someone broken in the middle of the night? Would you stop to listen, or walk away? The steam from 2 ceramic mugs created delicate spirals in the dim lobby lighting, carrying the warm scent of bergamot between them like an unspoken invitation. Delilah settled back into her chair, wrapping her fingers around her own mug for comfort as much as warmth. Across from her, Liam stared at the tea as if it held answers to questions he'd forgotten how to ask. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that happens when 2 people recognize something broken in each other. "You don't have to stay," he said finally, though his voice carried no conviction. "I'm sure you have things to do, people waiting. My grandmother's asleep by now, and my shift doesn't officially end until 6 a.m. Delilah took a small sip, letting the tea warm her throat. "Besides, someone once told me that the best conversations happen when you least expect them." Liam lifted the mug with careful hands, as if afraid it might shatter. When he tasted the tea, something in his expression softened. "It's been months since anyone just sat with me, without wanting something." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Delilah had worked in hospitality long enough to recognize the difference between loneliness and isolation. Loneliness was missing people. Isolation was forgetting that connection was even possible. "People always want something," she said gently. "Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's status, but sometimes—" she paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes they just want to not feel alone for a while." Liam's grey eyes found hers over the rim of his mug. "Which one are you?" The question should have felt invasive, but instead, it felt like the first honest thing either of them had said all night. Delilah considered her answer, watching the way the lobby's ambient lighting played across his tired features. "I'm the kind of person who makes tea at 1 in the morning for strangers who look like they've forgotten what kindness feels like." Something shifted in Liam's posture. His shoulders dropped slightly, and for the first time since she'd approached him, he seemed to truly settle into the chair. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd call security. Someone who'd follow protocol." He set his mug down on the small table between them with deliberate care. "Someone who wouldn't see that I'm barely holding it together." The vulnerability in his voice made Delilah's chest tighten. She'd heard that same note of barely contained desperation in her own voice 3 years ago, when the medical bills started piling up and her dreams began crumbling like sandcastles at high tide. "I don't know what happened to you," she said quietly, "but I know what it looks like when someone's world falls apart. You learn to recognize the signs." Liam studied her face with newfound attention. "You talk like someone who's been there. We all have our storms." Delilah traced the rim of her mug with one finger, a nervous habit she'd developed during her grandmother's worst health scares. "Some of us just get better at hiding the damage." The distant sound of a delivery truck rumbling down the street outside reminded them both that the world continued moving, even in these suspended moments of connection. Liam leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, Delilah saw him as something other than a broken man in an expensive suit. "I had everything planned," he said suddenly, as if the words had been waiting behind a dam that finally burst. "The business, the house, the future, everything mapped out like one of my engineering blueprints." His laugh was bitter and raw. "Turns out people aren't as predictable as structural load calculations." Delilah felt the familiar ache of recognizing pain in someone else. "Plans are just suggestions we make to the universe. Doesn't mean the universe is listening." "Is that your philosophy?" "That's my grandmother's philosophy. She raised me after my parents died, and she always said that life has a way of teaching you what you actually need to know, even when it's not what you want to learn." Liam was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, more curious than desperate. "What did life teach you?" The question caught Delilah off guard. Most people asked about her job, her schedule, her plans for advancement. Nobody ever asked about the lessons carved into her soul by loss and survival. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is just stay. When everything's falling apart, when nothing makes sense, sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is your presence. She met his eyes steadily. No solutions, no fixes, just staying. The lobby's grandfather clock chimed twice, marking the passage of time neither of them had noticed. Liam finished his tea and set the empty mug down with a soft clink that seemed to echo in the vast space around them. "I should let you get back to work," he said, but he made no move to leave. "You should," Delilah agreed, but she didn't move either. Instead, they sat in comfortable silence, two people who had stumbled into something neither had expected. The storm that Delilah's grandmother had taught her to sense was definitely coming, but for the first time in months, it didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something that might finally wash away the debris they'd both been carrying. When Liam finally stood to leave, he paused beside her chair. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Delilah looked up at him, seeing not the broken millionaire who'd been sitting alone in the dark, but a man who was slowly remembering what it felt like to reach toward another human being. "I'll put the kettle on," she said. And as she watched him walk toward the revolving doors, Delilah realized that she'd just agreed to something that would change the careful, controlled rhythm of her life forever. 3 nights later, Delilah found herself listening for the sound of expensive leather shoes against marble floors. She hadn't expected him to return. Men like Liam Hartwell didn't make habits of late-night conversations with hotel staff. They had assistants for emotional labor, therapists for breakthrough moments, and social circles that moved in entirely different orbits than hers. But as the lobby clock approached 1 a.m., she caught herself glancing toward the seating area more frequently than her work required. The second night, he'd appeared like a ghost, materializing from shadows, settling into the same chair without explanation. They'd talked about safer things, the weather, the hotel's history, the way San Diego fog rolled in differently each season. Surface conversations that felt like careful excavation, each word a gentle brush, clearing away years of accumulated dust. Tonight, the chair sat empty. Delilah tried to focus on her closing procedures, but her attention kept drifting. She told herself it was normal curiosity, professional concern for a guest who'd seemed so lost, but the disappointment settling in her chest felt too personal for professional distance. "You're distracted tonight." The voice came from behind her, and Delilah spun around so quickly she nearly knocked over her coffee mug. Liam stood near the concierge desk, wearing dark jeans and a simple grey sweater instead of his usual wrinkled suit. The change made him look younger, more approachable, and somehow more real. "I didn't hear you come in," she said, her hand pressed against her chest where her heart was doing complicated rhythms. "I've been sitting in the parking garage for 20 minutes. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed both nervous and familiar. "Trying to convince myself this was a bad idea." "What changed your mind?" Liam moved closer to the reception desk, his fingers drumming against the marble surface. "I realized I've been looking forward to this all day. He paused, searching for words. "That's the first time I've looked forward to anything in 8 months. The admission settled between them with the weight of something precious and fragile. Delilah recognized the courage it took to speak that truth out loud. She'd felt the same way about their conversations, anticipation that felt foreign after years of just surviving each day. "The tea's already ready," she said softly, gesturing toward the small service area she'd set up near the windows. 2 mugs waited on a silver tray, steam curling upward in invitation. This time, when they settled into their chairs, the dynamic felt different, less like a chance encounter, more like a ritual they were consciously choosing to create together. "Tell me about before," Delilah said, surprising herself with the directness of the request. "Before whatever happened that brought you here." Liam's hand stilled around his mug. "That's a dangerous question." "I'm not afraid of dangerous questions." "Are you afraid of dangerous answers?" For a moment, she thought he might retreat into the careful politeness that had marked their previous conversations. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and seemed to make a decision. "I used to believe that love was like engineering," he said quietly. "That if you calculated all the variables correctly, if you built strong enough foundations, nothing could break what you created." His laugh was hollow. "I was so fucking wrong it's almost funny." Delilah waited, sensing there was more beneath the surface of that bitter humor. "Her name was Isabella. We were together for 3 years, engaged for 6 months. The wedding was supposed to be—" He stopped, shaking his head. 2 days before the ceremony, she called it off, said she'd been in love with my best friend since college and couldn't pretend anymore." The words came out flat, practiced, as if he'd rehearsed this explanation for other conversations that never happened. But Delilah could hear the jagged edges underneath the composed delivery. "That must have been devastating," she said simply. "Devastating." Liam tested the word like he was hearing it for the first time. Everyone kept using that word, devastating, heartbreaking, shocking. But none of those words captured what it actually felt like. What did it feel like? Like I'd been living in a house I thought was mine, only to discover I'd never actually owned it. I was just renting space in someone else's life, and the lease expired without notice. Delilah felt something inside her chest crack open. She understood that particular kind of displacement, the discovery that your place in the world was more temporary than you'd imagined. The worst part, Liam continued, wasn't even the betrayal. It was realizing that maybe I'd never really known her at all, or maybe she'd never really known me. 3 years of what I thought was intimacy, and we were strangers sharing a bed. Maybe, Delilah said carefully, knowing someone isn't about time. Maybe it's about truth. Liam looked at her with sharp attention. What do you mean? You can spend years with someone and never show them who you really are. Or you can have one conversation with a stranger and feel more seen than you have in months. She met his gaze steadily. Truth isn't about duration. It's about courage. The silence that followed felt charged with recognition. They were no longer just two people making conversation in an empty hotel lobby. They were two people acknowledging that something real was happening between them, something that defied the careful boundaries they'd both learned to maintain. I should probably warn you, Liam said quietly. I'm not good company these days. I'm angry, I'm bitter, and I don't trust my own judgment about people anymore. And I should probably warn you, Delilah replied, that I'm not the kind of woman who scares easily. Anger I can handle, bitterness fades. But dishonesty, she shook her head, that's what I can't work with. Are you always this direct? Only when it matters. Liam set down his empty mug and leaned forward slightly, studying her face as if trying to memorize the arrangement of her features. Why does this matter, Delilah? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to name, but as Delilah looked into his grey eyes, she realized that pretense had become impossible. Because, she said quietly, I haven't felt this awake in 3 years. And in that moment both of them understood that they'd crossed a line from which there would be no safe return. The first rays of dawn filtered through the lobby's massive windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber that made the previous night's confessions feel like shared secrets from another world. Delilah glanced at the grandfather clock and felt a jolt of surprise. 4:30 a.m. They'd been talking for over 3 hours, and it had felt like minutes. Her shift supervisor, Miguel, would arrive in 90 minutes to find her still in yesterday's uniform, her careful composure replaced by something softer and more vulnerable. I should let you finish your work, Liam said, but he made no move to leave. Instead, he watched her gather scattered papers with the focused attention of someone memorizing details. It's mostly done. Delilah's fingers fumbled with the evening reports, her usual efficiency compromised by the awareness of his gaze. Just the final security check and inventory count. Can I walk with you? The question surprised them both. Liam looked as startled by his own words as Delilah felt hearing them. But something had shifted between them in those hours of conversation, creating a gravity that made separation feel unnatural. Yes, if you want to. They moved through the hotel's quiet corridors together, their footsteps creating a gentle rhythm against polished floors. Delilah checked conference rooms and storage areas with practiced efficiency, while Liam followed at a respectful distance, his presence both comforting and electric. You're good at this, he observed, as she reset the thermostat in the business center. 5 years of practice, 3 here, 2 at the Marriott downtown before this. She paused, realizing how automatic that response had been. Why do you ask? You move like someone who cares about details, like this place matters to you. Delilah considered this as they walked toward the service elevator. My grandmother always said that how you treat other people's spaces says everything about who you are. Even if it's just a job, it's still your signature on the world. Wise woman. The wisest. Delilah's voice softened with affection. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Worked 3 jobs to keep us in our apartment. Never once complained about having her retirement plans turned upside down. They reached the basement level where she needed to check the laundry facilities. The fluorescent lighting was harsher down here, more institutional, but somehow their conversation maintained its intimate quality. That's why you left school, Liam said quietly. It wasn't a question. Delilah nodded, running her hand along the industrial washing machines as she counted them. Nursing school. I was 2 years in when she had her first heart attack. The medical bills, the missed work, someone had to choose between her health and my dreams. That's not a choice anyone should have to make. No, it's not. But it's the choice I had. She turned to face him, leaning against one of the machines. I don't regret it. I just... Sometimes I wonder who I might have been. Liam moved closer, his expression serious. You would have been a good nurse. How do you know? Because you listen like someone who understands that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. Sometimes it's about sitting with someone in their brokenness until they remember how to be whole. The words hit Delilah like a physical force, striking something deep in her chest that she'd kept carefully protected. She looked at this man who'd been a stranger a week ago and felt seen in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. Liam, I know. His voice was rough with understanding. This is complicated. Complicated doesn't begin to cover it. Delilah pushed away from the washing machine, needing movement to process the emotions swirling through her system. You're a guest. I'm staff. You're going through something impossible, and You're what? She stopped walking and turned to face him. I'm falling for someone I barely know, and it's the stupidest thing I've ever done. The confession hung between them like a challenge. Liam's eyes widened slightly, then darkened with something that looked like relief mixed with fear. If it helps, he said quietly, I've been thinking about you every day since Tuesday. Not just looking forward to seeing you, actually thinking about you, about things you've said, the way you laugh, how you make tea like it's a meditation. Delilah felt her breath catch. That doesn't help at all. No, Liam agreed, moving closer until she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. It makes everything worse. They stood there in the harsh basement lighting, surrounded by industrial equipment and the scent of industrial detergent, and Delilah thought she'd never been more aware of another person in her entire life. The space between them felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. We should go back upstairs, she whispered. We should, he agreed. Neither of them moved. Instead, Liam reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek with fingers that trembled slightly. Delilah leaned into the touch without thinking, her eyes closing at the gentleness of it. This is crazy, she murmured. Completely insane, he agreed, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. When she opened her eyes, his face was closer than before, close enough that she could see the exhaustion that still lingered around his eyes, the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide, the way he was looking at her like she might disappear if he blinked. Delilah, he said, her name a question and a prayer. I know, she whispered back, and in that basement surrounded by washing machines and fluorescent lights, something irrevocable shifted between them. They didn't kiss. That would come later when they were both ready to acknowledge what was happening. But they stood there, foreheads almost touching, breathing the same air and understanding that their careful friendship had just transformed into something far more dangerous. When they finally made their way back to the lobby, the morning shift was beginning to arrive. Delilah watched Liam walk toward the parking garage and knew that everything had changed. What she didn't know was that Miguel had been watching from the security office, and that hotel gossip traveled faster than room service. The whispers started on Thursday morning. Delilah noticed them first in the employee break room, where conversations died abruptly when she entered. Carmen from housekeeping suddenly became very interested in her coffee, while Jose from maintenance found urgent business with his phone. The silence felt thick and deliberate, like a curtain dropping mid-performance. By afternoon, the whispers had evolved into sideways glances and knowing smirks. When she passed the front desk during her lunch break, she caught fragments of conversations that made her stomach clench with dread. Seen leaving the parking garage together, way past her shift, thinks she can land herself a rich one. Delilah kept her expression neutral and her spine straight, but inside something vital was crumbling. She'd worked too hard building her reputation here to watch it dissolve into hotel gossip and speculation. Miguel cornered her during the 3 o'clock shift change. We need to talk, he said, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by professional concern. My office. Now. The security office felt smaller than usual, cramped with tension and unspoken accusations. Miguel closed the door and turned to face her with the expression of someone delivering bad news. How long? He asked without preamble. How long what? Don't play games with me, Delilah. I've got cameras showing you and Hartwell having private conversations every night this week. I've got staff reporting that you two disappeared together for over an hour yesterday morning. Miguel crossed his arms. So I'll ask again, how long has this been going on? Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks, part embarrassment and part anger. We've talked, that's all. He seemed distressed. I offered tea. It's called customer service. Customer service doesn't usually involve basement tours and intimate touching. The words hit like a physical blow. Delilah realized that Miguel hadn't just seen them together. He'd seen the moment in the laundry room, witnessed Liam's hand on her face, the way they'd stood so close that breathing had become a conscious effort. "Miguel, it's not what you think. I think you're a smart woman who's about to make a very stupid mistake." His voice softened slightly, but the warning remained clear. "You know the policy about fraternizing with guests. More than that, you know how this looks." Delilah did know. She'd seen other staff members navigate similar situations, watched some get promoted for networking, while others got fired for inappropriate conduct. The difference usually came down to class, race, and how willing management was to protect their investment. "Are you firing me?" she asked quietly. "I'm telling you to be careful. Hartwell's got money and connections, which means he's got protection. You've got—" Miguel gestured vaguely, his meaning clear without being spoken. "You've got everything to lose and nothing to gain." The conversation ended with Delilah promising to maintain appropriate professional boundaries, a phrase that tasted like ash in her mouth. She returned to her duties with mechanical precision, her mind churning with anger, fear, and a deep sadness that surprised her with its intensity. When Liam appeared in the lobby that night, Delilah felt her heart perform complex gymnastics that her brain immediately tried to suppress. "So you look upset," he said, settling into his usual chair but maintaining more distance than before. "Work stuff." She handed him his tea with careful formality, making sure their fingers didn't touch. "Nothing I can't handle." Liam studied her face with the attention she'd grown to love and now had to resist. "This is about us, isn't it?" The directness of the question forced her to meet his eyes. She saw understanding there, and something that looked like guilt. "People talk," she said simply. "What kind of talk?" Delilah considered lying, protecting him from the uglier implications of their connection, but their relationship, whatever it was becoming, had been built on honesty. "The kind where I'm a gold digger looking for a meal ticket, and you're a rich man amusing himself with the help." Liam's expression darkened with anger, but she could tell it wasn't directed at her. "Who said that? Does it matter? It's what people think." Delilah sat down across from him, but perched on the edge of her chair like she might need to escape quickly. "Miguel saw us yesterday morning, in the basement." "Ah." Liam leaned back, processing this information. "And now there are consequences." "There are always consequences. The question is whether they're worth it." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of unspoken implications settling between them like a third presence. Delilah watched Liam's face cycle through emotions: frustration, protectiveness, calculation, and something that looked dangerously like determination. "What if I talked to Miguel?" he said finally. "Explained that—" "No." The word came out sharper than she'd intended. That would only make it worse. Rich guest defending poor employee? That's exactly the narrative they're already writing. "So what do you want me to do? Pretend we don't have something real happening here?" The question hit her like a physical force, because that was exactly what she was asking, wasn't it? Pretend that the past week hadn't changed everything. Pretend that she didn't think about him during every quiet moment. Pretend that their conversations hadn't become the brightest part of her days. "I want you to understand that my job isn't just my income," she said quietly. "It's my grandmother's medical care, our rent, our groceries. It's everything that keeps us stable." She met his eyes steadily. "I can't risk that. Not for anyone." Liam was quiet for a long moment, his hands wrapped around his mug like an anchor. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "You're right, I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking about what this could cost you. I know you weren't. That's not your fault. It's just the reality of different worlds." "Different worlds," he repeated, tasting the phrase. "Is that what we have?" Delilah felt something break inside her chest, small and sharp and final. "I think it's what we've always had. We just forgot for a while." When Liam left that night, he paused at the revolving door and looked back at her with an expression that would haunt her dreams. It was the look of someone watching something precious slip away, powerless to stop it. After he was gone, Delilah sat alone in the lobby and let herself cry for exactly 3 minutes. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her uniform, and went back to work. But the ache in her chest suggested that some things, once broken, could never be fully repaired. 3 days passed without Liam appearing in the lobby. Delilah told herself it was for the best. The gossip had died down to occasional whispers. Miguel's suspicious glances had returned to their usual professional indifference, and her routine had settled back into its familiar rhythm. Everything was exactly as it should be. So why did she feel like she was suffocating? Friday night brought an unexpected complication in the form of a corporate event in the hotel's grand ballroom. Tech executives, venture capitalists, and San Diego's business elite mingled over cocktails and catered appetizers. their conversations blending into a sophisticated hum that echoed through the lobby. Delilah worked the extended shift, managing check-ins for out-of-town guests and coordinating with catering staff. The work kept her hands busy, but her mind wandered to grey eyes and conversations that had felt like coming home. She was processing a room key when she heard his voice. "Thank you for accommodating the last-minute changes. The presentation went perfectly." Delilah's fingers froze on the keyboard. She looked up slowly, her heart performing acrobatics that her professional smile tried to hide. Liam stood 15 feet away, talking with the hotel's general manager and two other men in expensive suits. He looked like he belonged in this world of power handshakes and casual networking, confident, articulate, every inch the successful businessman she'd almost forgotten he was. Their eyes met across the lobby's marble expanse. For a moment, the sophisticated chatter faded into background noise, and Delilah felt that familiar electric current that had been missing from her life for 3 endless days. Liam excused himself from his conversation and walked toward the reception desk with measured steps. Delilah's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. "Good evening, Mr. Hartwell," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "I hope the event met your expectations." It did. His voice was formal, appropriate for the public setting, but his eyes held depths of conversation she couldn't access here. "I was wondering if I could speak with you, privately." Delilah glanced around the busy lobby, acutely aware of the staff members who might be watching, the hotel guests who could overhear, the delicate balance she'd been working so hard to maintain. "I'm afraid I can't leave my post during the event, sir. Perhaps if you spoke with my supervisor." Delilah. Her name was quiet, almost lost in the ambient noise, but it carried the weight of everything they couldn't say in public. "Please." The vulnerability in that single word nearly undid her professional composure. She looked at this man who'd somehow become essential to her breathing and felt the careful walls she'd built over the past 3 days begin to crack. "The business center closes at 10, she said quietly, not looking directly at him. "Sometimes guests need access to the fax machine after hours." Understanding flickered in Liam's eyes. "I might need to send some documents later. Room 127B, the door code is 4847. He nodded once, formal and businesslike, then returned to his networking obligations. Delilah watched him go, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. The 2 hours until 10 o'clock felt like geological ages. When she finally slipped away from the reception desk, telling Carmen she needed to reset the business center equipment, Delilah's hands were shaking slightly. She found Liam sitting in one of the ergonomic chairs, staring at a blank computer screen, like it held answers to questions he'd forgotten how to ask. "You came," she said, closing the door behind her. "I wasn't sure you wanted me to." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Delilah moved closer but maintained the careful distance that had become their new normal. "I wasn't sure either," she said, "but these 3 days have been hell," Liam finished. Complete, unmitigated hell. They looked at each other across the small room, both understanding that they were standing at a crossroads with no good options. The space between them felt charged with everything they couldn't have, everything they were trying to resist, everything that felt more real than the carefully constructed lives they'd been living. "I've been thinking," Liam said carefully, "about what you said, about different worlds. And I think you're wrong." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his attention focused entirely on her. "I think we're from the same world, the one where people work hard for what they have, where loyalty means something, where kindness isn't currency." He paused. "Money doesn't make us different species, Delilah. Money makes everything different," she replied softly. "You can afford to take risks I can't even imagine. You can afford to make mistakes that would destroy me. You're right. And I'm sorry for not understanding that sooner." Liam stood up, moving closer but still respecting the invisible boundary between them. "But I can't pretend that what we have is ordinary. I can't pretend that meeting you didn't change everything." Delilah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "It changed everything for me too. That's what makes this so hard." "What if," Liam said quietly, "we didn't have to figure out everything at once? What if we just took it one day at a time? One day at a time doing what? Meeting in secret, pretending we don't care about each other, living on the margins of something that feels more real than anything else in my life." The words came out more passionate than she'd intended, revealing emotions she'd been trying to keep carefully contained. Liam's eyes widened slightly, and she saw hope flicker across his features. "You feel it too," he said, It wasn't a question. Of course I feel it. How could I not feel it? Delilah's voice broke slightly. But feeling something and being able to act on it are two completely different things. Liam reached toward her, then stopped himself, his hand hanging in the air between them like a question mark. What if we could find a way? What if there was a solution that didn't require you to risk everything? Like what? I don't know yet, but I'm good at solving problems, Delilah. Give me time to think. She looked at his face, seeing determination mixed with desperation, hope fighting with realism. Part of her wanted to believe that love could overcome practical obstacles, that they could write their own rules and damn the consequences. But the larger part of her, the part that had learned to survive in a world that didn't offer second chances, knew better. Time, she repeated softly. That's the one thing I'm not sure we have. When they left the business center separately, 5 minutes apart to avoid suspicion, Delilah felt like she was carrying a bomb in her chest, something beautiful and dangerous that could explode at any moment, destroying everything she'd worked so hard to build. But for the first time in 3 days, she could breathe again. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, shattering the fragile peace Delilah had been trying to maintain. Miss Moore, this is Dr. Williams from Mercy General. Your grandmother was brought in about an hour ago. You're listed as her emergency contact. The phone nearly slipped from Delilah's trembling fingers. She was sitting in the hotel lobby, having just finished another careful conversation with Liam, where they'd talked about everything except what they both desperately wanted to say. What happened? Is she... She's stable now, but it was touch and go for a while. Another heart attack, more severe than the previous ones. We need you here as soon as possible to discuss treatment options. Delilah's world tilted sideways. Treatment options. The phrase that had haunted her nightmares for 3 years, the words that came with price tags she couldn't afford, and choices no one should have to make. I'll be right there, she managed, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. She hung up and stared at the phone, her mind struggling to process the information. Grandma Rosie, who'd raised her with fierce love and infinite patience, who'd worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat, who taught her that kindness was a strength and not a weakness. Delilah, what's wrong? Liam's voice cut through her paralysis. She looked up to find him standing beside her chair, his face creased with concern. She'd been so lost in the shock of the call that she hadn't even noticed him approaching. My grandmother, she whispered. Heart attack. I have to go. Without hesitation, Liam pulled out his phone. I'll call you a car. Which hospital? Mercy General, but I can't afford... Don't. His voice was firm but gentle. Don't worry about money right now. Let me handle this. Delilah wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the careful independence she'd fought so hard to preserve, but the thought of waiting for a bus while her grandmother lay in a hospital bed made her pride seem suddenly irrelevant. Thank you, she said quietly. The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. Liam sat beside her in the back seat of the black sedan, not touching but close enough that she could feel his steady presence. He didn't try to fill the silence with empty reassurances or meaningless comfort. He simply stayed, and somehow that meant everything. At the hospital, Dr. Williams painted a picture that was both hopeful and devastating. Grandma Rosie was alive, but she would need extensive cardiac rehabilitation, possibly surgery, and definitely long-term care that would cost more than Delilah made in 2 years. The good news is that she's responding well to treatment, Dr. Williams said, his kind eyes reflecting years of delivering impossible news to families like theirs. The challenging news is that this level of care isn't covered by her current insurance. Delilah felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. She could hear Liam's sharp intake of breath beside her, understanding immediately what those words meant for her future. How much time do I have to figure out the financial arrangements? She asked, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. We can keep her comfortable for now, but without a clear payment plan, we'll need to transfer her to the county facility within 72 hours. The county facility, where understaffed nurses managed too many patients and hope went to die slowly. Delilah had visited friends' relatives there before. She knew what those words meant. In the hallway outside the doctor's office, Liam caught her arm gently. Delilah, let me help. No. The word came out sharper than she'd intended. This isn't your responsibility. Maybe not. But I care about you, which means I care about the people you love. Caring doesn't make this your problem to solve. Liam ran a hand through his hair, frustration and helplessness warring in his expression. What if it didn't have to be charity? What if there was another way? Like what? I don't know yet, but give me time to think. Don't make any decisions about transferring her until we explore all the options. Delilah looked at this man who'd somehow become central to her world and felt a dangerous hope blooming in her chest. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, but standing in this sterile hospital corridor with the smell of disinfectant and despair surrounding them, she found herself clinging to it anyway. 3 days, she said quietly. That's all the time we have. When they finally went in to see Grandma Rosie, Delilah felt her heart break a little more. The woman who'd raised her looked so small in the hospital bed, her dark skin ashen against the white sheets, machines monitoring every heartbeat like mechanical prayers. "Baby girl." Grandma Rosie's voice was weak but warm, her eyes lighting up when she saw Delilah. "Don't you worry about this old heart, it's been through worse. Grandma, you need to rest, don't try to talk." "Nonsense. I want to meet this young man who's been making you smile lately." Rosie's sharp eyes focused on Liam, who'd been standing quietly near the door. "Come here, son, let me get a look at you." Delilah felt heat flood her cheeks. Even from a hospital bed recovering from a heart attack, her grandmother was still trying to manage her love life. Liam approached the bed with careful respect, his usual confidence tempered by genuine humility. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm Liam. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." "Circumstances don't matter much when you get to my age," Rosie said, studying his face with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read people for survival. "What matters is how you treat the people you care about." She looked between Delilah and Liam with knowing eyes. "And I can see you care about my granddaughter." "Very much," Liam said quietly, his honesty cutting through any pretense or social niceties. Rosie nodded slowly, then reached for Delilah's hand with fingers that felt too fragile. "This one's been carrying the world on her shoulders since she was 12 years old. Maybe it's time someone helped share the load." Later, in the hospital parking garage, Delilah felt the full weight of the evening crash down on her. The fear, the impossible financial pressure, the way Liam had stepped in without being asked, the way her grandmother had looked at them like she could see a future Delilah was afraid to imagine. "I can't let you pay for this," she said into the cool night air. "Then don't let me pay for it," Liam replied. "Let me invest in it." Delilah turned to look at him confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I have an idea. It's crazy and complicated and might not work at all. But if you're willing to trust me, I think I know how to solve this without making you feel like charity." Standing there under the fluorescent parking garage lights, with her grandmother fighting for her life 3 floors above them, Delilah realized she was about to make a decision that would change everything. The question was whether she was brave enough to take the leap. The envelope arrived at the hotel the next morning, delivered by a courier who asked specifically for Delilah Moore. She stared at the cream-colored paper, with Liam's name embossed in the corner, her heart performing gymnastics that had nothing to do with caffeine. Miguel watched from behind the front desk, his expression carefully neutral, but his attention focused entirely on her reaction. "Personal delivery?" he asked, his tone carrying layers of meaning. "Looks like it." Delilah's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a business card for a law firm downtown. The letter was written in Liam's careful handwriting, each word chosen with the precision she'd come to associate with his engineering mind. "Delilah, I told you I was good at solving problems. Here's my proposal. I need someone I trust to help me restart my business. Not as an employee, but as a partner, someone with emotional intelligence, attention to detail, and the kind of integrity that can't be taught. The law firm will explain the specifics, but essentially, I'm offering you a 40% partnership in a new consulting company. The startup capital would be sufficient to cover your grandmother's medical expenses as an advance on future profits. This isn't charity, this is me betting on the smartest, most capable person I know. The choice is yours. But please, before you say no, let them explain how this could work. LPS. Your grandmother was right. It's time someone helped share the load." Delilah read the letter 3 times, her mind struggling to process what Liam was offering. A partnership, not a handout, not a rescue, but a genuine business proposition that happened to solve her most desperate problem. "Everything all right?" Miguel's voice cut through her racing thoughts. Yes, I think so." Delilah folded the letter carefully, slipping it into her pocket. "Miguel, I need to take a personal day tomorrow." 2 personal days in 1 week. That's not like you." "No," she agreed, meeting his suspicious gaze steadily. "It's not." The law firm's offices occupied 3 floors of a glass tower downtown, all polished marble and understated wealth. Delilah felt distinctly out of place in her best dress, a navy blue shift she'd bought for job interviews 2 years ago. But the receptionist greeted her with professional warmth. "Ms. Moore, Mr. Caldwell is expecting you." James Caldwell turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 50s, with intelligent eyes and the kind of gentle authority that suggested he'd spent years helping people navigate complex decisions. His office overlooked San Diego Bay, but Delilah found herself focused entirely on the documents spread across his mahogany desk. "Mr. Hartwell has asked me to explain the partnership structure he's proposing," Caldwell said, settling into his chair. "It's quite generous, actually. More than generous." "I don't understand business partnerships," Delilah admitted. "I need you to explain it like I'm 12, Caldwell smiled. "That's refreshing honesty. Let me break it down simply." He pulled out a folder. "Liam wants to start a marine engineering consulting firm. He provides the technical expertise and startup capital. You would provide business operations, client relations, and strategic oversight. I don't know anything about marine engineering. You don't need to. Your job would be understanding people, clients, employees, vendors, the human side of business that most technical people struggle with." Caldwell leaned forward. "Liam believes you have exceptional emotional intelligence and practical wisdom. Based on our conversation, I'm inclined to agree." Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "What exactly would my responsibilities be?" "Initially learning the business. Liam would mentor you through the first year, while you handle client communications, project coordination, and operational efficiency. Eventually, you'd take over the business side entirely while he focuses on the technical work." "And the financial arrangement?" 40% ownership stake in the company. Your grandmother's medical expenses would be covered as an advance against future profits, but you'd be earning that money through your work, not accepting charity." Caldwell's expression grew serious. "I want to be clear about something, Ms. Moore. This is a legitimate business proposition. Liam has shown me projected revenues, market analysis, and a 5-year business plan. He's not creating a job for you. He's offering you a career." Delilah stared at the contract in front of her, the legal language swimming together into incomprehensible patterns. "Why would he do this?" "Because he believes in your potential, and because—" Caldwell paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because he cares about your future in a way that goes beyond professional interest." The admission hung in the air between them, acknowledging what everyone could see, but nobody had been willing to name directly. "This is crazy," Delilah whispered. "The best opportunities usually are." That evening, Delilah sat beside her grandmother's hospital bed, the unsigned contract spread across the rolling tray table. Grandma Rosie had been awake for most of the day, her color better and her voice stronger. "You look like you're wrestling with something big, baby girl," Rosie observed, her sharp eyes taking in Delilah's troubled expression. "Grandma, what would you do if someone offered you everything you wanted but you weren't sure you deserved it?" I'd ask myself whether I was confusing deserving with being scared. Rosie reached for Delilah's hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Fear has a way of dressing itself up as humility, making us think we're being modest when we're really just being cowards. But what if I fail? What if I'm not smart enough or capable enough?" "Child, you've been running a household and managing my medical care since you were 15 years old. You think that takes less intelligence than some fancy business degree?" Rosie's voice carried the gentle firmness that had guided Delilah through every major decision of her life. "Besides, failure is just education wearing a disguise. What about the other part, the personal part?" Rosie smiled, and for a moment, she looked like the vibrant woman who'd raised Delilah with such fierce love. "That boy looks at you like you hung the moon, baby. And more important, he looks at you like he sees exactly who you are, not who he thinks you should be." She squeezed Delilah's fingers gently. "That's rarer than you might think." Later that night, Delilah called the number on Liam's business card. He answered on the first ring as if he'd been waiting beside the phone. "Delilah?" "The contract," she said without preamble. "Is this real? All of it?" "Every word. The business plan, the partnership, the financial projections. It's all legitimate. And if it doesn't work out, if I'm terrible at it, then we'll figure out something else. Together." His voice was steady, certain. "But you won't be terrible at it. You're the most naturally gifted people person I've ever met." Delilah closed her eyes, standing at the crossroads between the safe, predictable life she'd built and the terrifying possibility of something extraordinary. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes, I'll do it." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that she wondered if the call had dropped. Then Liam's voice came through, rough with emotion. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself." When they hung up, Delilah sat in her small apartment and felt the future rearranging itself around her. Tomorrow, she would sign papers that would change everything. Tomorrow, she would step into a life she'd never dared to imagine. Tonight, she would let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved something beautiful. The resignation letter felt heavier than it should have, considering it was just 2 pieces of paper that would change the entire trajectory of Delilah's life. She sat in Miguel's office, watching him read the formal notice, with an expression that cycled through surprise, suspicion, and something that might have been respect. Outside, the morning shift was beginning, and she could hear the familiar sounds of the Ocean View Grand coming to life, sounds she would no longer be part of after today. "A business partnership," Miguel said finally, setting the letter down with deliberate care. "With Hartwell." "Yes. And you're sure this isn't—" He paused, clearly struggling with how to phrase his concerns diplomatically. "It's legitimate. I had it reviewed by an independent attorney." Delilah had spent her own money on a consultation with a different law firm, needing to hear from someone without ties to Liam that the partnership was real and legally sound. "I'm not naive, Miguel. I know how this looks." "I'm sure you do." Miguel leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. You've always been too smart for this job." The admission surprised her. She'd expected resistance, maybe even accusations. Instead, Miguel seemed genuinely pleased for her success, even if he didn't entirely approve of the circumstances. "Thank you. That means more than you know. Just—" He hesitated, then spoke with the care of someone who'd watched too many people make decisions they couldn't undo. "Be careful. Rich men aren't always what they seem, even the ones who appear to have good intentions." Delilah nodded, understanding the warning came from experience rather than judgment. "I will." Later that afternoon, she stood outside a sleek office building in downtown San Diego, staring up at the 15th floor where Hartwell Marine Consulting would soon occupy a corner suite. Liam had insisted she choose the space, saying that since she'd be handling client relations, she needed to feel comfortable in the environment. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt like ascending into a different version of her life. When the doors opened, Liam was waiting in the hallway wearing jeans and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, but there was an energy about him that suggested he'd been running on pure excitement for days. "Ready to see your new office?" he asked, his smile carrying a boyish enthusiasm that made her heart skip. "Our office," she corrected, though the distinction felt important. "Right, our office." The space was everything she hadn't dared to imagine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor, natural light flooding the open areas and private offices. The reception area was designed with warm, welcoming colors that would put clients at ease, while the conference room had the kind of sophisticated technology that spoke to serious business capabilities. "The corner office is yours," Liam said, guiding her toward a space that was larger than her entire apartment. "You'll be doing most of the client meetings, so you should have the impressive view." Delilah stood in the doorway, looking at the desk positioned to take advantage of both the harbor view and the natural light. A small plant sat in one corner, something green and hopeful that someone had placed there with care. "Liam, this is too much." "It's exactly enough." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. "Delilah, I need you to understand something. This isn't me being generous or trying to impress you. This is me recognizing talent and creating the environment where that talent can flourish." She turned to look at him, seeing the sincerity in his gray eyes. "You really believe I can do this?" "I don't just believe it. I'm betting my entire professional future on it." The weight of that responsibility should have been terrifying, but instead, Delilah felt something like excitement building in her chest. For the first time in years, someone was asking her to dream big instead of just survive. "When do we start?" "Our first client meeting is Monday, a yacht manufacturer looking to expand into sustainable propulsion systems." Liam's expression grew more serious, shifting into business mode. They specifically requested someone who could help them navigate the environmental regulations while maintaining luxury appeal. "And you think I can do that?" "I think you can learn to do that. And I think your perspective, someone who understands both practical limitations and aspirational goals, will be exactly what they need." They spent the next 2 hours walking through the space, discussing everything from office layout to client communication strategies. Liam had clearly thought through every detail, but he asked for her input on everything. treating her opinions with the respect due an equal partner, rather than someone being granted a favor. As the afternoon light began to shift toward evening, they found themselves in the conference room surrounded by business plans and partnership documents. The enormity of what they were embarking on seemed to settle over both of them simultaneously. "Are you scared?" Delilah asked quietly. "Terrified," Liam admitted, "but it's the good kind of terrified, the kind that comes with believing something amazing might actually be possible. I never thought I'd be sitting in a place like this, talking about clients and business strategies and 5-year plans. Where did you think you'd be?" Delilah considered the question seriously. "Working at the hotel until my back gave out, maybe taking night classes if I could ever save enough money. Taking care of my grandmother and hoping nothing major went wrong." She looked around the conference room with its polished table and state-of-the-art technology. "This feels like someone else's life." "It is someone else's life," Liam said. "It's the life of Delilah Moore, business partner and consultant. She's related to the hotel receptionist, but she's not the same person." The distinction felt both profound and slightly terrifying. Change, even positive change, required leaving something behind. "What if I miss her? The hotel receptionist? Then you'll know she taught you something important about who you want to be." As they prepared to leave the office, Liam paused by the reception area. "There's something else," he said, his voice carrying a note of nervousness that was entirely different from business concerns. "What? Tomorrow night after we finish setting up the computer systems, would you like to have dinner? Not a business dinner," he clarified quickly. "Just dinner, as two people who've been talking around something for weeks and might finally be ready to talk about it directly." Delilah felt her breath catch. Throughout all the business discussions and partnership negotiations, they'd maintained careful professional boundaries. But the invitation hung in the air between them, acknowledging that their connection had always been about more than business compatibility. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with how quickly the answer came. "I'd like that very much." When Liam smiled, really smiled, without reservation or careful boundaries, Delilah realized that she'd been waiting for this moment since that first night in the hotel lobby. The moment when they could stop pretending that what they felt for each other was anything less than extraordinary. Walking to her car in the parking garage, Delilah felt like she was floating 6 inches above the ground. In the space of one day, she'd left behind the safe, predictable life she'd built and stepped into something that felt like the beginning of everything she'd never dared to want. Tomorrow, she would start learning to be someone new. Tonight, she would call her grandmother and share the news that their lives were about to change in ways that felt like miracles. And somewhere between the business partnership and the dinner invitation, she'd realized that maybe she was brave enough to believe in happy endings after all. The restaurant Liam chose was nothing like Delilah expected. Instead of the kind of expensive establishment that would have reinforced their different worlds, he'd selected a small Italian place in Little Italy where the tables were crowded together and the noise level suggested that people came here for the food and company rather than to be seen. When Delilah arrived, she found him already seated at a corner table, looking nervous in a way she'd never seen before. "You look beautiful," he said as she sat down, his voice carrying the kind of honesty that bypassed polite compliments and went straight to truth. Delilah had chosen her outfit carefully, a deep green dress that made her feel confident without trying too hard, paired with the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her for her 21st birthday. But the way Liam looked at her made her feel like she was wearing something magical. "You look terrified," she replied, offering him a gentle smile. "Are you having second thoughts about the business partnership?" "No second thoughts about business." Liam's fingers drummed against the tablecloth, a nervous gesture she'd come to recognize. "But plenty of thoughts about everything else." The waiter appeared, took their drink orders, and disappeared again, leaving them alone with the weight of everything they'd been carefully not discussing for weeks. Around them, other couples laughed and argued and fell in love, providing a soundtrack of normal life that made their own careful dance seem suddenly absurd. "Liam," Delilah said quietly, "what are we doing here?" "Hopefully," he said, "we're finally having the conversation we should have had weeks ago." "Which conversation is that?" "The one where I tell you that meeting you changed everything about how I see the world, and you tell me whether that terrifies you as much as it terrifies me." The honesty of the statement hit Delilah like a physical force. She'd been expecting careful navigation around their feelings, diplomatic acknowledgement of their connection. Instead, Liam had cut straight to the heart of everything that mattered. "It does terrify me," she admitted, "but not for the reasons you might think. Tell me." Delilah took a sip of her wine, gathering courage for words she'd never said out loud. "I'm terrified because I've never felt this way about anyone. I'm terrified because when I'm with you I forget to be careful. I'm terrified because you make me want things I never thought I could have. What kind of things? A future that isn't just about surviving. Someone to build something with, instead of just carrying everything alone. She met his eyes across the small table. Love that feels like coming home instead of another responsibility to manage. Liam was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes studying her face as if he was memorizing every detail. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. I was engaged for 6 months, and I never felt a fraction of what I feel when you make me tea at 2 in the morning. The admission hung between them, loaded with implications that neither of them could ignore anymore. Liam, I know it's complicated. I know the timing is terrible and the circumstances are messy, and there are 1,000 reasons why this is a bad idea. He leaned forward, his attention focused entirely on her. But I also know that I haven't felt truly alive since before Isabella left, and then you appeared in a hotel lobby and everything changed. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying that I think I'm falling in love with you, and I want to know if there's any chance you might be falling in love with me too. The words hit Delilah like a shockwave, even though part of her had been expecting them. They sat there in the crowded restaurant, surrounded by the ordinary magic of other people's Friday nights, and she felt the last of her careful defenses crumble. I don't think I'm falling in love with you, she said quietly. Liam's face went very still, and she saw him preparing to hear rejection. I think I already fell. Weeks ago. Maybe that first night when you asked me if I'd ever felt like the world stopped spinning. She reached across the table and touched his hand, feeling the way his fingers immediately wrapped around hers. I've been trying to talk myself out of it ever since. And how's that working for you? Terribly, absolutely terribly. Liam's smile started slowly, then spread across his face like sunrise. Good, because I was planning to fight for this, and it's going to be much easier if you're not fighting against me. Fight for what, exactly? For us. For the possibility that 2 people who've both been broken by love might be exactly what each other needs to heal. He turned his hand palm up, threading their fingers together properly, for the chance to build something real together, both in business and in life. Delilah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but they were the good kind of tears, the kind that came with hope instead of despair. What if we mess it up? What if mixing business and personal ruins everything? Then we'll figure it out as we go. But Delilah, I'd rather mess this up trying than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. The waiter returned to take their dinner orders, and they spent several minutes navigating the menu while their hands remained linked across the table. It was such a small gesture, but it felt revolutionary. The first time they'd allowed themselves to show affection in public, the first acknowledgement that they were more than business partners or late-night confidants. There's something else I need to tell you, Liam said after the waiter left. More confessions. More honesty. His expression grew serious. The business partnership, the office, all of it, it's completely legitimate. But it wasn't my first idea. Delilah felt a flutter of concern. What was your first idea? To offer to pay your grandmother's medical bills directly. No strings attached, just help from someone who cares about you. He squeezed her fingers gently. But I realized that would be exactly the wrong thing to do. Not because I don't want to help, but because you needed something that honored your independence and your capabilities. So you created a business partnership instead. I created an opportunity for you to save your grandmother yourself, using talents you already had but maybe didn't recognize. Liam's voice carried quiet conviction. You didn't need rescuing, Delilah. You needed a chance to be everything you're capable of being. The distinction mattered more than she could express. It was the difference between charity and investment, between being saved and being empowered, between feeling grateful and feeling proud. That's why you really think this will work, she said, understanding dawning. Not because you're doing me a favor, but because you genuinely believe I can do this. I don't just believe you can do this. I believe you're going to be extraordinary at it. As their dinner arrived and they settled into easier conversation about plans and possibilities, Delilah felt something inside her chest that she'd almost forgotten how to recognize. Pure, uncomplicated happiness. They were still figuring out the details, still navigating the complex intersection of business and romance, still learning how to be vulnerable with each other. But sitting in that crowded restaurant with her hand in his, watching Liam's face light up as he talked about their shared future, Delilah realized that sometimes the most important decisions weren't about logic or practicality or careful risk assessment. Sometimes they were about having the courage to reach for something beautiful, even when you weren't sure you deserved it. And for the first time in her life, Delilah Moore felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 2 years later, the morning sun streaming through the harbor-facing windows of Hartwell Marine Consulting painted everything in shades of gold and possibility. Delilah stood at her office window, watching the boats drift across San Diego Bay while balancing her phone between her shoulder and ear. On the other end of the line, a potential client from Seattle was explaining their need for sustainable yacht design consultation, and she found herself automatically taking notes, even though she could probably handle this conversation in her sleep by now. "Absolutely, Mr. Chen. We can have a preliminary assessment to you by Thursday, and if you decide to move forward, I'll fly up next week to meet with your team in person." She ended the call and added the appointment to her calendar, smiling at how natural the words had become. Delilah Moore, consultant and business owner, discussing flights and assessments and team meetings like she'd been doing it her entire life. "Another project?" Liam's voice came from the doorway, warm with the kind of pride that had never gotten old, even after 2 years of watching her excel at everything she touched. "Luxury eco-yacht manufacturer. They want to break into the carbon-neutral market without sacrificing performance." Delilah turned to face him, taking in the sight of her business partner and, as of 3 months ago, fiancé leaning against her doorframe with his coffee mug and morning smile. "I told them we'd do the preliminary assessment for free if they let us use their project as a case study for the sustainability conference." Smart. Building the reputation while building the portfolio. "I learned from the best." Liam moved into her office, settling into the chair across from her desk that had become his unofficial spot for their morning planning sessions. The easy intimacy of the gesture still made her heart skip occasionally, the way small domestic moments sometimes felt like miracles when you'd never expected to have them. "Speaking of learning," he said, pulling out his phone, "I just got confirmation from the conference organizers. They want you to be the keynote speaker for the Environmental Innovation Panel." Delilah felt that familiar flutter of excitement mixed with disbelief. 2 years ago, she'd been making tea for hotel guests at midnight. Today, industry leaders wanted to hear her thoughts on sustainable business practices. "Are you sure they don't want both of us?" They specifically requested Delilah Moore, the business strategist who's been revolutionizing client relations in marine consulting. Liam's grin was pure delight. "Apparently, word has gotten around about how you convinced Henderson Yachts to completely redesign their manufacturing process just by listening to what their customers actually wanted. That wasn't revolutionary. That was just common sense. That was you seeing solutions that everyone else missed because you understand people in a way that most business consultants never learn." The compliment settled warmly in her chest, the way his faith in her abilities always did. 2 years of success hadn't completely erased the occasional voice that whispered she was lucky rather than capable, but moments like these made it easier to believe in her own competence. "How's your grandmother feeling about the keynote?" Liam asked, settling deeper into his chair. "She's threatening to buy a new dress for the occasion. Something about needing to look proper when her granddaughter addresses all those fancy business people." Delilah's voice softened with affection. "She's doing so well, Liam. The doctors say her heart function has improved more than they expected. She's tough, runs in the family." The compliment made Delilah think about resilience, about the difference between surviving and thriving, about how much her definition of strength had evolved since that night in the hotel lobby when she'd first encountered a broken man who couldn't sleep. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked suddenly. "The first time you stayed in the lobby?" "Every day." Liam's voice grew quieter, more reflective. "Not the pain part, but the moment when you sat down and offered tea instead of calling security. That was the moment my life started moving forward again. Mine too. I just didn't realize it at the time." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them looking out at the harbor where sailboats and yachts moved through the morning light with the kind of graceful purpose that had become a metaphor for their own journey together. "I have something for you," Liam said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "It's not my birthday. It's not a birthday present. It's more like a celebration of how far we've come." He handed her a small wrapped package, and when she opened it, she found a beautiful business card holder made of polished wood with her name engraved on a small silver plate. "Delilah Moore, Senior Partner, Hartwell Marine Consulting." "Senior Partner? The paperwork's already filed. You've earned it." Liam's expression grew serious. "You've brought in 60% of our new clients this year. You've revolutionized our project management systems, and half our competitors are trying to poach you." He paused. It's time the business structure reflected reality. Delilah ran her fingers over the engraved nameplate, feeling the solid weight of recognition made tangible. Senior partner. Not just because someone was being generous, but because she'd earned it through 2 years of hard work, creative problem-solving, and the kind of dedication that turned opportunities into achievements. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for all of it. The chance, the support, the faith in me when I couldn't find faith in myself. Thank you for taking the chance, for trusting me when you had every reason to be suspicious of rich men bearing business propositions. Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Liam corrected, moving around the desk to pull her into his arms. "The best decision you ever made was saying yes when I asked you to marry me." "That wasn't a decision," Delilah said, leaning into his embrace. "That was inevitability. We were always going to end up here." Here meant more than just their successful business or their engagement. It meant the life they'd built together, carefully and intentionally, balancing professional partnership with personal intimacy, supporting each other's growth while maintaining their individual identities. "Speaking of inevitability," Liam said, "we should probably head to the wedding venue soon. Final walkthrough with the coordinator." Their wedding was still 3 months away, but they'd chosen to have the ceremony at a small oceanfront venue that overlooked the same harbor they could see from their office windows. Nothing elaborate or expensive, just family and close friends celebrating the love that had grown from midnight conversations and shared tea into something that felt as natural and essential as breathing. "Small wedding, remember?" Delilah said, straightening his tie out of habit. "Grandma Rosie, your parents, a few friends from work. Small wedding, big love. The biggest." As they prepared to leave for their appointment, Delilah took one last look around her office, the harbor view, the awards on the wall, the family photos on her desk, the engagement ring that caught the morning light like a promise made manifest. 2 years ago, she'd been a hotel receptionist with dreams she'd packed away to focus on survival. Today, she was a successful business owner, a respected consultant, and a woman who'd learned that sometimes the most important thing you could do was believe you deserved the beautiful things that appeared in your life. The love hadn't started with flowers or grand gestures. It had started with presence, with patience, with 2 people who'd learned to see each other clearly in the quiet hours when the rest of the world was sleeping. And sometimes, Delilah thought as they walked toward the elevator together, that was exactly how the most extraordinary love stories were supposed to begin. What would you do if someone saw potential in you that you couldn't see in yourself? Would you have the courage to trust them? And more importantly, to trust yourself? Have you ever experienced a moment where kindness from a stranger changed the entire direction of your life? What did you learn about the power of simply being present for someone who's struggling? If you could go back to a time when you felt stuck or limited by circumstances, what would you tell yourself about the possibilities that might be waiting just around the corner? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.